Hello, and welcome back to your favorite witchy podcast. As the cauldron bubbles, as always, this is your host, Jasmine, and I have a lovely, lovely guest for tonight's episode. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Nora. You can also call me Estradia, and I will be your paranormal co-hostess with the mostest.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining. Today, we are going to be taking a bit of a revisit, a bit of a deep dive, if you will, back to when we had our Whispers Estate project launch. We, went to Whispers Estate, which is one of the, I'm not going to say necessarily, I shy away from using the word haunted. I prefer the word occupied. So we're going to say it's the one of the most oldest occupied residential homes in our home state of Indiana. And myself and a group of other folks, some of them witchy folks, some of them not witchy folks, went, as some of you may remember, to the Whispers Estate and had a whole experience, had a whole extravaganza. There are testimonial videos from some of the folks who went on this Whispers project, and there's some delicious, delectable hidden footage that will stay behind the paywall of Patreon due to some not suited for work sort of content that is not quite made for YouTube. So if you're interested in seeing that tape, you'll have to look at the links below and go check out the Patreon. Now, Nora, you were not involved in this project when it was current. However, you and I have talked pretty extensively, I would say, in the past week or week and a half or so, kind of revisiting some of this material and us kind of picking it apart. What are some of your thoughts that you've gathered from the Whispers Estate?
So, like you said, I wasn't there. So everything that I have is just an opinion based on what I observed via the videos that I watched, the testimonials and everything like that, as well as taking in information from the documentary that we watched, which we can discuss later. I will say, being as old a house as it is, it does not surprise me that the Whispers Estate is as you said, occupied as it is. And just for some minor background, because we've already kind of discussed my occult background to a certain degree on here. I do have a background as a amateur paranormal investigator. I used to be a part of a group that did some paranormal investigations, as well as cryptid hunting, I guess we'll say.
Which, Nora, I would like to just say that's part of why I think I enjoyed kind of revisiting this project with you, because you do have that background.
Right. And, I also grew up with a deep love of haunted houses and paranormal activity and things like that. So I guess where I want to start is the outside of the house. And you've said this a couple times, and I think you said it in your testimonial, and you've said it in a couple other places, I think, or maybe this is just stuff we talked about. The outside of the house is fairly unassuming. It looks like an older, potentially historical house. It definitely looks like an older Victorian home, but when I say older, I mean like on the newer end of older Victorian, like just before Victorian homes started becoming more modernized and things like that. The outside of the house is a plain white house. It's very unassuming. The most noticeable thing about the house when you are looking at images of the Whispers Estate, of course, are the blacked out windows. And to me, the thing I noticed first, and I've talked about them with you a couple times, are those angel statues out front. And I don't know how many of your viewers believe in being able to pick up energetic impressions from videos that were taken in the past or pictures, but I do believe that these things connect to sympathetic links, and I will tell you that those angel statues are creepy. Not just because of the way they look, yeah, and it's not just because of the way they look. But I fully believe that those angel statues are there acting as a ward. But the thing that's interesting about this ward is it's not meant to keep stuff out. I definitely feel like the way the house is built, especially considering it has the blacked out windows, which I believe you told me that they blacked out the windows so that like randos could just peep in on tours and things like that that were going on inside.
Right. It's that. And then it's also too, I mean, some of the locals and stuff have, I mean, filed reports as to some like concerning stuff that they've seen at the house. And then authorities would come out and investigate and there would be nothing going on. But like
Right.
locals would see stuff through the windows, like people in the house when, there's no living people in the physical world in the home.
Right. So I can understand why they would black out the windows. I do think it's a strange option, but I do understand why they did it. I do think that those angel statues are interesting though, and there's something that always draw my attention when I look at pictures of the house. I'm looking at a picture of the house right now, and those angel statues are very prominent. So the layout of the house is interesting to me because, like you said, the outside of the house, and like I said, the outside of the house is very unassuming, but when you go inside the house, it's like you enter a completely different house. Like the house is laid out with like rich wood, like dark woods. There's a lot of deep red tones, and like mossy greens and mustard yellows and or goldenrods and things like that. These very deep colors that are all throughout the house, which the ghost hunter in me is kind of like, that feels a little gimmicky, because like it almost looks like the house is trying to appear haunted. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like these tones, these deep reds, these deep yellows, and things like that, these are colors that you find in the Victorian home. So it's not that strange. But the home, you've told me about some of the things that you found throughout the house, and especially that painting that's in the house.
Right.
It all feels very, very much set up to induce the feelings of haunting. Now, that being said, based on the testimonials of the people that you went with and based off the testimonials of other people, it seems like everyone who goes experiences some kind of activity in some way, shape, or form.
Right. Even if it's like secondhand, like even if they didn't experience something themselves, someone in their group has experienced something. And people very much report that the house kind of picks and chooses who it wants to talk with. Also, that's like a very common thing amongst comments about the house of other groups who have gone.
Right. And, it's interesting because we kind of talked about prolific concepts of hauntings that we have throughout the United States. And across, even outside the United States, like the idea of a home that that is haunted, but it's maybe not ghosts. It's more like the house has developed a personality of its own and has created entities and things like that that represents the house. That is, it's prolific in folklore. I mean, you can find it in movies like Rose Red, The Haunting of Hill House, and The Haunting of Bly Manor. Like these aren't unique concepts, but it's interesting that we have one right here in Indiana. I definitely think that it's definitely someplace I would like to personally go to myself at some point in the future. If I can ever find a group to go with me, that would definitely be a very interesting place to visit.
It for sure is. It for sure is. And you've watched all of the testimonials from the group that I went with. So why don't we analyze some of that and kind of pick some of that apart? And for those of you watching, all of these testimonial style videos are shot kind of like firsthand experience videos. These are all available for you to watch yourself here on the YouTube channel. You might have to kind of scroll back a bit. I really should make a Whispers Estates playlist. So maybe by the time that you're hearing this, I will have already done that. And you can just go to the Whispers Estates playlist. But I guess starting with Kat's testimony first, Nora, what did you think of that testimonial?
Yeah, Cats was the first one I watched, and their testimonial, I really liked their energy because Cat was like, I'm gonna go in here and we're gonna fuck around and find out. Um, I really liked Cat's candor about the whole thing, that they weren't afraid to like go into Rachel's room, which is one of the rooms in the house. For those who don't know, there is a room in the house that belonged to a 7-year-old girl named Rachel who passed away because of possibly because of burn damage from a fire around Christmas time, or it could have been because of the doctor who had residents of the house giving her too much morphine. There's some speculation on that. But anyway, Rachel, there was some activity going on in Rachel's room that they were picking up on a device, and Kat went right in. Kat was like, "I'm going to go hang out with the ghost," and the way that played out was very interesting. So, I really found Kat's account of things to be, dare I say, some of the most entertaining of the content, aside from the information about the Three Kings ritual and the information about the seance that was going on. I do think Kat had one of the most challenging jobs in that Kat had to be alone. And I'm sure you've talked about this before, but for listeners who don't know, the way that they had set this up the night that they went, Jasmine was in the basement performing the Three Kings ritual. Kat was by themselves on the first floor of the house, by themselves, acting as the middleman or the barrier, or acting as someone who stood in the liminal space between the seance and the Three Kings ritual. Then everyone else was up in the attic room, in the seance room, performing a seance. Kat's alone during this, and basically Kat spends their time walking in a circle the whole time, and they made the very smart decision to have one of the devices with them that is provided by the owner of the home. And basically the way this device works is if something gets close to it, it goes off. And Kat had some really interesting experiences during that. The most interesting experience of that, just to kind of make sure that I don't ramble on too much about Kat's account, is the appearance of the groundskeeper. So there's a groundskeeper who stays there through the evening while there's a tour going on. And just from the information that I've been given about the groundskeeper and their demeanor and the way that they act, the way that the groundskeeper kind of crept up on Kat in this instance is interesting. So basically, Kat was by themselves. They were doing the thing, walking around, listening for activity and things like that. And then they turn around, and all of a sudden, there's the groundskeeper in the doorway of the kitchen, I believe, right, Jasmine?
Yeah, in the doorway between, I think it was either the parlor room and the dining room, or the dining room and the kitchen. I'm not real sure, but I know that per Kat's testimonial, she was pretty startled by it.
Yeah, and I mean, understandably so. But like, I guess the groundskeeper just was kind of like, "What's going on down there?" And Kat, after they finally caught their breath, was like, "Ritual, seance," and it just kind of struck me as funny. But something that I find interesting about that is that it seems, I don't know, that whole thing with the groundskeeper feels
Well, and
sus.
then, right. Well, and we were also kind of looking at some reviews online of the house, and there's other people who have said they've experienced strange behavior and the groundskeeper, also kind of hinting to this idea that it could be a parallel, even.
Right, and that's something that we had talked about. And it's not uncommon in situations like this where you have this level of psychic phenomenon that the projection of familiar people can be a thing. So while this is purely speculation on my part, could the groundskeeper who appeared to Kat have actually been the groundskeeper, or was it an apparition placed by the house to kind of mess with them? We may never know, but it's spooky.
Right. And I think, the thing about Kat's testimonial is like Kat said in the video, they're the only ones whose experience isn't necessarily like as documented. I mean, obviously there's all of the video and content on Patreon of the Three Kings ritual, and then there's the audio from the seance, and then there's the video on Patreon where the actual Three Kings video itself is layered with the audio of the Three Kings ritual, with the audio of the seance. But like Kat's experience, we didn't necessarily have that recorded. Looking back, I think if there was any regret that I have about doing this project is I guess kind of overlooked the significance of maybe having some night vision cameras set up on the ground floor. Obviously, I would have made sure everyone consented to this. But like, it would have been cool to be able to see what we could have picked up digitally with having some night vision cameras while Kat's walking around the main floor of the house in the dark, doing the middleman aspect of this. And then also, like you had said too, using this digital material to try to create some sort of astral recognitional imprint to be able to pick up and kind of sense what you can by placing yourself in that space via a digital wave. So I think that would be my regret is I wish I would have had, Kat, like Kat kind of said, like, her experience is the only one that is not as documented. So she was really just relying off of, she was texting, I believe, one of her partners. And then she did take some audio recording, and I did include that in the project. However, it's a pretty corrupted file, unfortunately. So you really have to like turn the volume up high and like really listen carefully because it's kind of corrupted, like I said. But in that, you can definitely hear some whispering and some noises, as well as like shit coming from the basement.
Right. And, it might be interesting because Kat did mention that she kind of had like a running, not like a running digital diary of the things that were going on, but like that they were texting someone and that I think they had taken some notes or something like that. So maybe it'd be interesting to, if she's willing to share some of that information, to have that posted or something like that. I don't know. Or maybe do another episode of this where Kat comes on and talks about that.
Oh yeah, I think that would be a really cool idea. What did you think of the overall aspect of like what we were doing at Whispers? This is something that um, to our knowledge, to the group's knowledge, this is something that hasn't been done to this sort of caliber. There's been a lot of paranormal adventurers, ghost hunters, people bringing in like EVPs, things of that nature. But as far as like ceremonial ritual or occult games or, a coven of witches coming in and kind of approaching it from more of the occult side, what did you think of what we were doing between, the Three Kings, the seance, how we had this set up? And then aside from that, also the Midnight Man. What was your kind of thoughts on how we orchestrated that?
I mean, I'll be completely honest. I have always been of the mind that ghost hunting groups would benefit from a witch, Like, the only time I've ever seen that executed was in the show Paranormal State, which was one of my favorite ghost hunting shows, which unfortunately I do believe they found out that it was very largely scripted and staged, but don't hold me to that because I'm not entirely sure. But they had a witch in the group. And so, sometimes, so I think that the idea of a ghost hunting group that is predominantly made up of witches, where instead of it being all about like the technology and being able to pick up on EVP, because I mean, let's be real, that stuff can be interesting, but you know, how many times have we seen a ghost hunting show where someone plays a crackly recording of what's supposed to be a ghost going, get out, and you know, it just kind of vaguely sounds like that. I think it could be very interesting to have a show where there is a group of witches who goes and investigates hauntings and performs rituals to you know, either help these ghosts pass on or see what's going on or see why the haunting is happening. In regards to the things going on at the Whispers Estate that you and your group did, initially I was a little confused because I was like, why are they doing these rituals? Is it because they want to find out what's going on? Is it because they want to just talk to the ghosts and get some information? Um, I think in regards to the house, you and I have talked about how we do think that there are spirits there, but the spirits are largely disinterested in speaking to people. And so how much of the haunting that people experience is based on the entity of the house, which may or may not manipulate the spirits within the house to act as part of the haunting. Talking about the seance and some of the testimonials with that, you know, I do think that it's interesting listening to the seance footage and hearing Sid, Jordan, and Paige's testimonials, because they talk a lot about, you know, the experience of dealing with these entities during the course of the seance. And you know, you hear Jordan, who is doing the Estes method, which is where you are listening to you have noise canceling headphones on that are hooked up to basically a small radio box that rapidly goes through radio stations. And as it rapidly goes through those stations, you pick up on words. And this is something that was largely popularized by the documentary Hellier. But it is a very interesting form of divination. And some of the stuff that he was saying correlated with not only the questions that were being asked during the seance, but also the things that you were doing during the Three Kings ritual. And, you know, he was getting things like get out, and also some derogatory, inflammatory language that was directed towards the group. I have to send mad respect to Sydney, because she did the work. I mean, so did Paige. Paige did a lot of really excellent mediumship, pulling cards, listening to the spirits and things like that. I'm still really impressed with Sydney. Basically protecting Jordan, protecting the people during the seance, listening to the things that Jordan was saying, listening to the spirits in the room. Sydney did a lot. Sydney
Well,
really
I
did a
was,
lot.
yeah, I think she did too. And I remember going back and, you know, putting this project together. And like, one of the things that kind of shook me when I was compiling this project is like, that I don't think anyone really realized at the time was happening. But once the project was put together and, you know, I's were dotted and T's were crossed, there's a part in the audio where like Sydney and I are completely separated in this house. We're nowhere near each other. Like I'm all the way down in the basement. She's all the way up in the attic. And I feel like part of Sydney was also kind of like not only looking over Jordan, not only trying to watch over the seance and just be the overall, you know, kind of watchdog protector, but like we were also doing a similar incantation at the same time, which I think really speaks to like how strong bounds of a coven can really be.
I completely agree. And that definitely shows when you watch the layered footage. What I do want to say about Paige is I really appreciated the fact that Paige was very calm the whole time. But then again, Paige is used to this house. Paige has been there many, many times. And I mean, the house is owned by her uncle. But I really appreciated how calm she was and how clear she was in the questions that she was asking. And I think that really benefited, especially with the pulling of the cards and the asking of the questions and getting responses that were fairly clear, even though the stuff coming through the Estes method, through the spirit box, even though the entities speaking through that were I don't want to say hostile, but they weren't very happy. I mean, it was a lot of get out, you know, throwing around, you know, derogatory words at the people, including misgendering one of the people that was there by dead naming them. And that's a really
Right.
interesting instance because at the same time that happens, you're down in the basement performing the Three Kings, and that happens. You're like, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do
Right.
that.
Right.
And it's really the synchronicities of things going on during this are really interesting. Going down to you in the basement, the Three Kings ritual, let's talk about how intense that must have been. Because you are another individual in this group by yourself in a basement, a dark, musty
Well,
basement.
well, I'm by myself in the sense that I'm separated from my group, but I think it's pretty evident that I'm not alone down there.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're not alone, but uh, you were in a dark basement tied to a chair with your feet in water with three mirrors in front of you. For those that don't know, the Three Kings ritual is a ritual where you have three mirrors in front of you in chairs. The only living participant of this is tied to a chair. And this whole thing is
With
lit
your
by
hands tied
with
behind your back.
hands bound and feet in
Yep.
water.
Yep.
And there's one candle. And the person performing the ritual has to stare straight ahead into the mirror that is in the center, while sort of using their peripheral vision to monitor what's going on in the other mirrors, but you do not want to look directly in those. Jasmine's whole role in this is that she's down in this spooky basement, and she's trying to keep the negative entities of the seance, or of the negative entities of the house, down there with her so that they don't disturb the seance, and so that the people at the seance can make connection with the spirits of the house. Can you talk a little bit, and I'm sure you've talked about this a little bit before, talk a little bit about how you felt during that?
Yeah. So, the main tape of it, of course, is on Patreon. Y'all can check the link if you want. And there's clips of it throughout the testimonial. But one thing that I think I haven't said that's on the video on Patreon or in my testimonial is like, I was pretty indifferent about doing this initially. I mean, the reason why we were doing it is because the idea was to try to attract the main entity of the house, like the spirit of the house itself, along with this particular malevolent entity and any other little entities that might be along with it or that might be offshoots of this main entity into the basement, to try to allow the spirits of the dead to rise to the top of the house. And we also were in the seance, they were summoning specific spirits. It wasn't every single, this house I think has like 20 or over 20 documented spirits of the dead that reside within the walls of this house. And we were calling on, I think, maybe 6. Like, it wasn't every single one that got invoked. And we had pulled cards about this prior to, of course, to figure out which spirits would be the most beneficial to talk to us. And the whole point of me doing this was to try to basically lure as much of the negativity and the maleficness into the basement. And I was the one chosen to do this per our group's divination. And I'm also the only person in the group who has done the Three Kings ritual before, which I've done the Three Kings ritual with a totally different group. And that was even before I was in the Solar Court Coven. So that's how I was introduced to it, as I had done it with a different magical order that I was in. And so, I mean, I've done this before, right? So going into this, I was kind of like, well, we've done this before, blah, blah, blah. And one thing also that has never been said, Nora, I haven't even told you this, is I have a video on my channel that is a return to sender video. And the properties of that return to sender was also taken with me to this Three Kings ritual, because I was planning on using the Three Kings ritual that I was doing also as an opportune time to get rid of a different conjuration. So I had that as well. And then I told you about, and maybe Sydney told you about it as well, about the necromancy I had done prior to, because, part of what the cards were saying is that this was supposed to be kind of like a team building, group building exercise for everyone involved. And the part that I was supposed to kind of take from this and benefit from this was kind of letting go of some control, not being so type A, and trusting and allowing the members of my coven to do the work that they were set out to do. And it's not that I don't trust them. Obviously, of course I do. I think that they're very well competent. I just wanted to do a little bit of necromancy to help the situation. So then we had that spirit, Agnes, from Crown Hill, who's associated with a lot of local witchy lore. And, we had her, and I think that's also confirmed in the seance audio and maybe Sydney's testimonial as well, that she actually showed up to the seance.
Yeah, I remember that being discussed.
But as far as my experience doing Three Kings, I mean, it was extremely intense. And it didn't really set in that, like, okay, girl, you're basically malefic bait. It didn't really like set in until like Kat was tying me up, my hands behind my back, my feet in water, and also being tied to the chair itself. That's when it kind of set in, that was like, oh, like, we really down here. But then I was like, well, like, I don't know, it kind of felt like you were on like a roller coaster right before, you know, that falling feeling. And I also definitely feel like it tested me. And I have a lot of experiences from that I don't think I would have had I not done the Three Kings ritual in this particular home. Because doing the Three Kings ritual where I had done it before was not at all to the same level and degree. As far as like, this was in the Whispers estate. This is one of the oldest residential homes in our state that you can go inside of, versus someone's house, doing the Three Kings ritual in someone's house. So that definitely added a different layer. And then just some of the things that I think were more, because, during the ritual, you're kind of in this trance, and you're inebriated. So much of that is kind of hazy, and so much of that I couldn't really remember. And I couldn't recall a lot of it at the time, because when I was pulled out, you kind of feel like you just had a weird dream. And it's like the harder you try to remember it, the more it escapes from you. But of course, going back and looking at the footage, that definitely, I mean, you can see a lot of things in the footage that you're like, okay.
Yeah, there's some really weird, unexplainable stuff in the footage. And the thing that I will say is, like, you can kind of tell when someone's playing pretend and stuff like that. It is evident that you are talking to someone or multiple someones, because there are points, there are some points in the Three Kings ritual through the footage where you're like kind of delirious and moaning and things like that. And then there are moments where you're actively talking to something. And, to those who might decide to go to Jasmine's Patreon so that they can see this footage, I know some people have issues with the idea of provoking spirits, but keep in mind that the point of this ritual that Jasmine is doing is meant to draw the malefic spirits of the house away from the seance, so that way she can keep them safe to some degree, and also so she can gather some information herself about the entity of the house, which I do believe you got some very good information about the entity of the house, because even if it's not something you could remember in the moment, I'm sure energetically you have memory of the entity that you encountered, or entities.
Well, and one of the things that I thought was like, also kind of a synchronicity is the way that my face contorted into the face of one of these malefic entities, who we all kind of have called like the puppeteer of the house, is also the same entity who Paige saw on the porch.
Right.
And both of these experiences happened separately. I can't recall exactly if, I think Paige saw the entity after the Three Kings in the seance, because I think Paige was going out to grab some stuff from the trunk and we were getting pizza, but it could have happened before. I'm not exactly sure if it happened before Three Kings or after and before the Midnight Man ritual, or ritual game, but I thought it was and then also to find out later that other groups have experienced this same sort of entity.
Hmm. And I do believe in Paige's testimonial, it was after the Three Kings ritual, before Midnight Man. So in that space where you guys were taking a break, I think is when she went out to her car. And as she was coming back in, she said she witnessed a white apparition on the porch at the far end of the porch, sitting in one of the rocking chairs, that she said had a very unnerving smile on its face.
And
Um,
that's exactly the face that I saw within the mirror as well. I mean, like this abysmal, sort of distorted mouth and like sunken in eyes and like kind of just like completely otherworldly, inhuman-esque. Like human-esque in the sense that you could tell it was a face, but inhuman-esque as in like the proportions weren't right for it to be like human at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And from watching the footage, I definitely saw some very strange things in the other mirror. Including, and I kind of pointed this out to you, there's a strange light anomaly that goes on that looks like it's above your head. At one point in the video, Jasmine leans forward and there's this like, it almost looks like a flame is coming out of the top of her head. And then there are points in time where I kind of see this flame kind of around the room. And then you can also, the footage is dark, so keep that in mind. But there's some weird distortions in the background of this footage as well that are interesting to observe. But yeah, so also this is all taking place within the span of 45 minutes. So it involved the group getting Jasmine all set up, getting Kat set up, and then everyone getting up to the attic from the first floor in order to get this all started and rolling. And then once they hit that 45-minute mark, it's a matter of everyone getting back downstairs and Kat getting downstairs to get Jasmine untied and kind of brought back around. And you can hear some very strange things during the audio of this. There's some growling. You can hear odd whispers going on. There are several points where you are intoning. You might not even necessarily be talking. At some points, you're kind of babbling, and there are points where it sounds like there are multiple voices. Like it is a very strange set of footage. Now, if anyone's expecting to watch this and see like full body apparitions or any of the typical things that you would experience in a ghost hunting video, this is not what that is. But what I will say is that there's definitely energy around the images of this house and around the tour that Jasmine and her group took that is palpable during the course of the video. So I do highly recommend that anyone listening go check out the videos on YouTube, listen to everybody's testimonials, watch the videos that Jasmine has provided. If you're interested more, go to Jasmine's Patreon and check out the video of the Three Kings ritual. Now, the reason that video is on Patreon, Jasmine, is because there's some slightly salacious material in there. Wouldn't you say so?
Yes, yeah. I had originally, intended for this to be a project that I wanted to share all of it and as much of it that I could. However, the Three Kings part one, there's some audio in there that I personally just don't really feel comfortable sharing on a platform like YouTube. Because I know some people are weird about the idea of a paywall, but you have to understand too that like a paywall kind of separates the people who are legitimately serious and curious about the content from the people who are coming to like troll or make fun of or ridicule or like whatever. Which not that I am saying that you cannot have constructive criticism on the content, because of course you can, but like there's moaning and there's groaning, and I'm in a delirious, inebriated state, and I'm incredibly vulnerable. And so sharing something like that on a platform like YouTube, I think is inappropriate. And then also like my shirt gets ripped and my chest is exposed. And like that's not necessarily something that I can put on YouTube. So there's that.
Right. And I mean, that's something to note, that like you are in this situation, your hands are bound. And you can see in the video that Jasmine's top has been affected. And there's no way that she could have done it herself. Uh like the her hands are bound behind her back. You see her moving a lot. She wiggles, she moves back and forth. You know, you hear her feet sloshing around in the water, but at no point in time was Jasmine ever able to like move her top around. And certainly, if she had just fallen out, she and or could have moved her hand, she would have fixed it. This wasn't that kind of situation. Um,
Well,
so
also the shirt, part of the shirt was literally ripped also.
right, you were saying that it was ripped, and that kind of goes to the spirits of the house, because I do believe that there's some history, especially with the doctor, of being kind of aggressive towards women. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Now, I'm not saying that the spirit of the doctor had anything to do with that, but if this is like a buildup of psychic phenomenon over time due to all of the tragedy that's happened in the house, I mean, this spirit could easily take on these aspects of the people that had lived there before. These things imprint into the walls of a home, residual hauntings, things that happen that are based off of psychic projection. It's not at all uncommon. The thing I find interesting about this house also is that with ghost hunting, and you and I have kind of talked about this, usually with ghost hunting, there is a time period where if it's ghosts, like if we're talking about spirits, they will probably not bother you with, because they don't want to be bothered within the first several hours. Usually interaction with ghosts is something that happens over time, because you have to kind of gain their trust like you would with any other spirit before they'll make themselves known, or agitate them to the point that they're like, get the heck out of my home. In this instance, you guys experienced feelings of spiritual resonance right away. So that
Yeah, I
definitely
think some of
tells
that
me,
has to do with the fact too that like we're witches.
yeah.
As opposed to going as like, well, I got my equipment with me and, you know.
And this is another reason why I think, an active show about witches ghost hunting would be so interesting, because we get to see psychics do this stuff sometimes, but we've never had like an active group of witches doing paranormal investigation in like a prime time kind of way. Like, I think that would be really interesting. But even still, to sum it all up, I think that your investigation of the Whispers estate is very interesting. I think the things that your group experienced were a combination of slightly terrifying and also very validating, in the sense that there is an entity within the home. And that entity is not exactly the nicest entity, but it's there, and you'll probably experience something.
Well, and it definitely kind of started this desire for us to do more content and more work like this. Like we've talked about next summer, Nora, which you're more than welcome to come to. We've talked about maybe next summer, maybe like June or July, probably like late June, early July, I would assume, of 2022, like going on another trip, whether it's a paranormal, like dealing with spirits of the dead, or whether it's like a cryptid situation. Um, and I had a lot of time working on this project, and yeah, there's definitely some very like triggering and unsettling and even horrific aspects to this project, but there's also like some really good comedy moments mixed in too.
Yeah.
And it was very much a very powerful, I feel like, team building, coven bonding sort of experience. And we went with people who weren't in the coven, who weren't initiated also. And like it was really cool having that experience too. And it was cool revisiting this project with you as someone who wasn't physically there at the time, but who has some background, who has some history and things like this, and who's also able to pick up on kind of like the digital witchery imprint of the material and kind of almost in a way time travel-y place yourself there and pick up on your own impressions as best you can without physically being there at the time of recording.
Right. And I mean, I guess in my case, it is good because I am a very astral person. So being able to pick up on those things is definitely, it can be a gift and a curse because sometimes you just look at an image and it gives you the heebie-jeebies. But I definitely, and I've said this before, if the opportunity to go back to this house is ever a thing, I would love to go. And I would definitely love to explore the children of the house more because I think that's the only thing that wasn't really done because during the seance you hear Sydney and Paige both saying, hey, we don't want the kids here, we don't want them involved. I do think it would be interesting to do a little seance in Rachel's room and, you know, see about talking to the kids. And I do know that if I ever got the opportunity to go, I would have to bring Rachel a doll because, you know, got to bring the kid a toy.
Well, for everyone listening, thank you all for supporting the channel, supporting the podcast. Nora, thank you for coming on and thank you for taking the time to watch some of those testimonials and, you know, watch the hidden footage as well. And I've had a lot of fun the past week and a half or so revisiting this, rehashing this. It's been a pleasure, of course, once again, you know, having you on here on the podcast. And yeah, I think this is we're going to wrap this episode up here. So thank you all. And until next time, blessed be.
Blessed